Hey bro, so Komodo's 8 camp today, right?
Yeah, dude.
Make sure you pack those batteries.
Yep. Got
How about the audio modules and the adapters?
yeah, I got it.
Please tell me you have ND filters because it's sunny as heck today.
Yeah, I got some ND filters.
At least 8 stops.
Dang, bro. Oh, I have the C70, bro. We're good. Before I go into the whole review, my thoughts on the C70 and different tests that we did, I wanted to give a quick disclaimer. I do not take reviewing gear lightly. I know that these different opinions can influence people's buying decisions. So with all that being said, these are my genuine opinions, and I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm not just throwing some fluff out there about the C70 or the Komodo or different camera gear that I'm reviewing. I'm well aware that there's weight behind certain opinions and different thoughts on gear and all of that. So take that for what you will, and let's get into it. So I've owned this camera for a little over 6 months. I've owned the 4D, I was a Sony shooter, FX3, bunch of different cameras. I own the Komodo. I also have the R5C, and this has quickly became my B cam to my Komodo / A cam. In this review, I want to be critical while also just sharing my thoughts. The dynamic range test won't be as crazy, but I just wanted to give some examples. I will be making a separate video comparing it directly to the Komodo. I know there are a lot of users debating on these two cameras. They're in the same price range, and there are a plethora of reasons why if I only had to choose one camera, it would be the C70 over the Komodo any day. But this isn't a comparison video. This is a video specifically about the C70, so let's get right into it. It'll all be laid out and labeled in the chapter markers below if you want to skip to a certain part. But the first reason I chose the C70 was that it has pretty decent autofocus. I know some people may shame autofocus. They may be like, manual focus everything or cinema, whatever. But for me, as a content creator and for certain work that I use, it actually makes my life so much easier. I always wanted to get a side view of someone running through trees. I just never had a project where that was necessary, so we actually simulated something. There's no real meaning behind the story. It's more of just a tense buildup and stress test of the autofocus in a real world situation, so enjoy. We're out here with the C70. We're gonna be doing some dynamic range tests. Autofocus, it had a new update, so we're gonna see how good it is. Put it on a gimbal, probably track my buddy Lewis just running through the forest like a madman. All right, so as you saw from the video, there was a couple times where it missed focus, but that entire video was shot with only using autofocus. For the beginning of shots, I made sure it locked on, but after that, I was just running around with a gimbal and handheld, didn't really think about it too much. I wanted to set a scenario that if I only relied on autofocus, how would it do? Did pretty good. The C70 is a camera that has received multiple updates since they released it. It got Canon RAW. It received multiple different autofocus updates. A quick side note on the C70 autofocus is that it does not work extremely well in low light. I'm usually not shooting a ton in low light. I don't shoot as many weddings as I used to, which is kind of crucial, but even then it did work fine when I did use it in those low light situations. So the C70's autofocus isn't groundbreaking. It's not the best thing in the planet. The reason why it's so special is because it's found in an actual cinema camera. This camera, being a cinema camera, uses most of its processing power to get the best possible image, the most dynamic range, the best color depth, all these different things. Most consumer DSLRs and mirrorless cameras do not have the processing power to have amazing autofocus as well as the best image quality possible due to overheating, costs. That's why having such incredible autofocus in the C70 is such an amazing quality. And the next thing I want to talk about is the internal NDs. This is probably my favorite feature about the C70. It saved me multiple times on set. That skit that we did at the beginning of the video, that has actually happened to me before. I guess I could be more prepared, but having one less thing to worry about on set is incredible. The fact that I can get 10 stops of ND in camera with just pressing a button isn't a new feature, but unless you've ever used a camera with internal NDs, it won't make sense to you why this is so crucial to have in a cinema camera. Also, I don't have to deal with ugly green color cast when using a variable ND. The quality of the ND in the camera is actually really good and has little to no color cast, so that's such a plus. Audio has been something that I haven't really focused on as much up until about a year ago. It's about when I started doing a lot more interviews and corporate work, but the audio preamps in the C70 are incredible. Yes, it has mini XLR, but to me that doesn't make a difference. I just have to get the right cable for it. All the audio that you're hearing right now is actually coming from a shotgun mic straight into the C70 with an XLR to mini XLR cable. It makes my life super easy. It's almost like just attaching a shotgun mic to a mirrorless vlogging camera. So if you've watched C70 reviews before, you know that the C70 has the same sensor as the C300 Mark III, which is a dual gain output sensor, and the camera costs like $11,000. But in layman terms, that means that this camera has incredible dynamic range. Yes, there are cameras that are better than this camera, but the fact that you can have a camera that's $5,500, you could find it on the used market for maybe even $4,000, that has this amount of dynamic range, internal NDs, good audio, and so many more reasons that we're gonna go into, is insane. I remember seeing videos of the C70 before I cared as much as I do now about dynamic range and different things, and I thought, why would someone pay that much money for a camera that has the exact same frame rates and resolutions as an R5 and no IBIS and it's Super 35? If you're serious about video work and your image quality, you will notice a difference. Your clients will notice a difference. It is on a completely different level than a mirrorless camera like the R5 or the R6. And I didn't really get that at the time, but now that I actually own the camera, I completely understand. There are so many scenarios where I don't have control over lighting and there are tons of shadows and highlights. With this camera, I don't necessarily worry that much. Yes, I try and get right exposure and not blow out my highlights, but I know that most of the time, if I expose for my highlights, I can recover shadow detail and not have to worry about it. Now, for another reason why the C70 is one of my favorite cameras, and this actually ties into why I choose it over the Komodo a lot of times, is its file size. The file sizes aren't extremely tiny, but in comparison to most cinema cameras, the file sizes are extremely manageable. I don't normally shoot in RAW on the C70 because the other codecs are way more manageable in file size and they're extremely good. But even the RAW light in the C70 is a fraction of what the compressed RAW is in the Komodo. There's not a lot more I'm going to go into about file sizes. Just know that when you're getting this camera, you're getting really good codecs that you're not going to need to buy 10 extra hard drives for. So the next reason is how customizable this thing is. I really didn't think this was going to be something that I was going to enjoy about the C70. I didn't even see a lot of people talking about it in their videos when looking at reviews, but it's actually extremely useful. I think there are 13 customizable buttons on this thing, and I use every single one of them. There are a couple different scenarios where I'm shooting with autofocus and I can tell this is a situation where my C70 is probably not going to do a good job, or I see it hunting, and I have a button that's set to turn off autofocus right at my fingers. I just click it, then I start pulling focus until I know I'm in a situation where the autofocus will work well again. There are so many other use cases for peaking, just different exposure tools that I have literally at the touch of my fingertips. The customizable buttons are something that I didn't really think I was going to be excited about, but I really love it about this camera. All right, so this next point is kind of a pain point for me, being that I own the R5C and it's really terrible in this area. I'm probably gonna sell that camera, but that's battery life. The C70 actually has incredible battery life. With the stock battery that it comes with, I can get 2.5 hours just out of one battery. And that's a lot, not even considering that this is a cinema camera. That's also something I don't need to go too in depth about. Just know the C70 has incredible battery life. And the final reason why I love this camera is how amazing it is for just run and gun situations. Unlike the Komodo, you don't need any accessories for it to just be usable on set. There are a couple accessories that I bring, which is like a monitor, I put a cage on it, and a couple different audio things, but it's super easy to just pack in a bag and travel with. That's a huge reason why I choose this camera over my other cameras 80% of the time. That's probably a good transition into some of the dislikes about this camera, because although it's really good for run and gun and the form factor is easy to pack away and all that different stuff, it's actually it's weird to say this after saying all the stuff I liked, but it's actually kind of uncomfortable to hold. And I'm not trying to be nitpicky here. It's just when you're actually shooting, normally your hand rests like this, and if you ever want to get a lower shot, you have to have your hands like this unless you have a top handle, which I do use, but I don't put it on there as often with the C70. So the form factor is a little annoying, but it's not something that's a deal breaker even in the slightest. Another dislike that was almost a deal breaker for me is the build quality of the C70. So I use this camera a lot on set. I use it in run and gun situations. It gets not beat up, but it definitely gets used. And the build quality on this camera is absolutely terrible. I don't understand what Canon was thinking when they made this. Well, I mean, they were probably thinking about money, but it doesn't make sense to me that the plastic on this cinema camera is worse quality than the plastic on an R6, and it doesn't even compare to the R5. I've owned two C70s, and my first one had a light fall. Wasn't intense at all, but there was a huge crack along the side of the plastic, which just, it's just that just doesn't make sense to me with the cinema camera. And also the hinge feels like an old JVC camcorder hinge that's just terrible. It's whatever. All the pros about the camera far outweigh the cons. And then the last thing that I cared about at first that I don't care at all is the Super 35 sensor. I was so used to shooting with full frame cameras all the time, and I was afraid that I was gonna get a different look when switching to the C70 because it had a Super 35 sensor, and I was wrong and naive. I use a speed booster on it anyways, and I prefer that because it doesn't really degrade my image and it gives me an extra stop of light, so it's a win-win for me. So to wrap it all up, this camera is amazing. The internal NDs are great. The image quality and dynamic range are incredible. The autofocus is solid. The audio preamps are really good. And it's just an amazing cinema camera to just grab and go. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but there are some people that maybe need to hear this. This camera will not make your images better if your composition sucks, you don't have proper exposure, you're not knowledgeable in balancing light and lighting a certain scene. And I say all of that to say, please do not buy this camera thinking that it's gonna make everything so much better. So with all that being said, gear absolutely matters, but you do not need a C70 to make beautiful images, and I still love this camera. If you haven't subscribed, I'm gonna be doing a comparison between the Komodo and the C70, and I'm also gonna be doing a video on this speed booster that I don't see a lot of content on, and it's definitely worth watching because it's an incredible speed booster. But anyways, that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.